Have you ever had one of those moments in life, sort of an epiphany moment, where everything that you've been through in your lifetime finally makes sense? Well, I'm having one of those moments right now.
Hey, I'm Jordan Bunch, the director of Loves God Likes Girls, and
I'm Marshall Webb. I am the director of photography on Loves God Likes Girls.
if you are unfamiliar with that term, that basically means that Marshall was in charge of everything on camera, what the final image looks like. Marshall was also the editor, the senior editor on the project. But I want to start by talking about the origins of the project. We come from a background of weddings, and I had built this company, Lady Bird Studios, that had grown to one of the bigger wedding productions in Central Texas, and so that meant that we had this crew that was trained up through the fire of live events. I started filming some of her conferences and some of those events, and that led us to continue this brainstorm about what are the stories that we could tell. We decided that we wanted to film a series of documentaries.
Coming from an event production standpoint, you're accustomed to things kind of happening on the fly, and so there's a little bit of crossover there in documentary filmmaking. The way we approach the Sally doc, there are a lot of opportunities that are a little bit more controlled environment, the way we wanted to light certain scenes. And so our approach was maybe a little bit more towards a narrative standpoint, in the sense that we did control some of those environments, and you see that in the film where there is some dramatic lighting because we wanted to create a mood or a sense of tone.
A lot of documentaries that you watch when they're filming some of these interview sessions, it might just be a one camera shoot with just natural lighting and that sort of thing, and we went for a very different approach because of the story, because of the sincerity of the moments that were going to be happening that we imagined might happen. And so it's interesting playing off of really understanding. I remember in conversation with Sally, going into each different shoot, thinking about who are the people that are going to be involved in this shoot, and what's their relationship look like, and what time period in their life was this, what was going on in Sally's life in this relationship, and also just in her world at that specific time. And that really informed the kind of lighting and camera choices and all that kind of things that that you made.
A lot of times there are locations you've never been to before. You kind of have to figure it out on the fly. There were some situations that we shot in that are pretty crazy.
Yeah, in fact, one of the more intense lighting scenes that we did was in that little chapel at Howland Oaks, and the day before we had no clue where we were going to shoot. We had a plan, and the plan fell through, and then we had plan B, C, D, and none of those worked out. In fact, one of them was just it was going to be really hot in that room because of the time of day and the way the light was going to come through the window, and it wasn't going to work. And ultimately, plan E ended up being the best plan ever, and I think that's one of the more beautifully lit scenes, but it's also one of the more dramatically lit scenes. That's an intense part of her life and her story. We weren't able to film on the university that she attended on that campus, but we were able to play with colors in a way that sort of gave homage to that. Not only colors, but also the room that we were in, the fact that it was in a chapel, it was a Christian school that she went to. We used the color of the school. We gelled the lights to be,
There's a behind the scenes shot of how we got our softbox up high enough so that we could get that look, and it was worth it.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how, your role in the film, not just as director, but you had to step in front of the camera. Tell us a little bit about, the story behind that, because it is interesting too.
So originally I wasn't supposed to be in the film. I was supposed to be, behind camera, just directing, and so it was definitely an interesting position to be in, being both director and, on camera. And that was not the plan. In fact, I almost thought that the shoot wasn't going to happen because our original plan was for someone else to play that part. For someone who had played the role of friend and pastor in her life to play that part, but they had a family deal come up where they were not going to be able to go on this road trip with us. So we kind of had to restructure the whole story. There's this story arc of her going with her friend and pastor to go on this life journey together, and her introduce him to all of these friends and let her see a more full picture of her life. And since that didn't work out, we still had all this stuff scheduled, and we just came up with a backup plan. We had enough of a relationship that it sort of made sense to make the new story arc, me and my film crew going on this journey with her to learn about her life and her ministry and all that.
Really, Jordan was supposed to be a vehicle so that we can allow the audience to join in this journey with Sally. But I felt like it was important to have because of your relationship with Sally, and that allowed us to break down barriers to allow us to get into more intimate moments and intimate scenes. I think that's super important. Let's talk about the production schedule. So, as you mentioned, we split this up.
Yeah.
There's 2 blocks. But total, we shot this thing in like 10 days.
Yeah.
And if you watch the film, there are multiple cities and there's multiple locations in those cities.
Yeah. So there's definitely like some obvious stuff like filming in Sally's childhood home, where her dad still lives, thankfully, and that was great to be able to do that. Going back and visiting her mom at the cemetery.
We had locations where we had complete control of our environment, right? And I know we've mentioned some locations where, it's maybe a public place. There was one location where we shot on the street. One of the biggest challenges and some of the learning curves for me was learning to have a kit and learn to be flexible with certain lighting situations. We shot in a coffee shop where we used no lights at all. And then there's some situations where we used street lighting and we accentuated it with LED panels and stuff like that. Those were challenges because those are locations that, you consider unideal, right, for filmmaking, but we made it work because it felt appropriate for those scenes.
Right. We were trying to choose this location in Deep Ellum. It ended up working that like one lane was blocked off with construction. Which was just like amazing. So we chose the spot, we had the road blocked off for us, at least that one lane, but we still had lots of traffic and like.
It would be really easy in that situation to get audio that is completely unusable. Props to our sound crew, which is Taylor.
Yeah.
And to be able to get that and make that work.
Let's talk about that. I like that you said that. Our sound crew was just Taylor. This is a really small crew.
Yep.
That made this. In fact, if you look closely at the credits, you're going to see, a relatively, a good-sized credit roll, but it's a lot of the same names over and over again. We wear a lot of hats.
What we were able to achieve with each member and the quality of work that each individual was able to contribute to the film is awesome. It was really impressive and fun to work on.
So the first day of production, the first day we're filming was at Sally's dad's house.
Yes.
That was a really difficult conversation to do. It was a really difficult room to shoot in.
It was.
But we chose that room because of the significance that it had to her story. So tell me about the difficulty of shooting in that room.
We had to set up, it was like 2 C-stands. And then we also had our lights in the room, which were these flapjacks that flip open, and then you set up all of this different stuff. You've got boom poles hanging over our talent, and then you've got to figure out where the cameras go.
Scene 1, take 1.
So you have a shot of Sally over his shoulder, and then a shot straight onto Dad in that scene, as well as a wide shot, and then a 4th angle that's kind of roaming, and that's usually the tighter angle that you see. And so we're rolling 4 cameras in that really tight space, and they all have a clean frame. So that was really a difficult challenge, but we wanted to have all 4 of those cameras.
Well, it's a very sensitive subject. If you've seen the movie, then you know why it's such a sensitive subject. But I'll just say that they did not have a good relationship growing up, on through college, and there's a lot of things about it that was really unhealthy. And that were painful for Sally, and they have a great relationship now, and so like she has to sort of have this interesting dynamic of they have a great relationship that's really been redeemed, but now they're coming up and digging all this stuff up from the past, and that was really painful to do, and painful for her, but painful for him to hear that, and I'm sure like sense of guilt and some of those things like coming back up, and that was just a really painful conversation a lot of the time that we had there, but it was so important to the film to really understand who Sally is, but there's also difficulty in the fact that we come from a place where a lot of people associate being gay with something that your parents did wrong.
Yeah.
And Sally nor her dad, nor does psychology really support that idea, but that's still an idea that a lot of people have. And so we needed to be able to tell this story. And so that was another really interesting dynamic and a part of that whole conversation that we really struggled with in editing too.
Yeah.
I mean, it was hard to not have that be, what people who come from that perspective thought. So one of the other challenges was that she's turned this way looking at Dad for this whole conversation, and then for whatever reason, I just couldn't stop it because it was just a moment. Sometimes in documentary filmmaking, there's just moments, and you just have to let them roll because otherwise you might ruin the whole vibe, right? So at some point, while she's having this conversation with Dad turned this way, and all the lighting and cameras and audio is set up for her to be positioned this way, she turned this way, and everything kind of goes crazy at that point because the audio doesn't sound as good, and I know all this, right? So I'm positioning and waving down, you and Teddy to hey, reposition, without saying anything, because if you say a word, it's going to be heard on camera, and then that audio is unusable. So I'm trying to get y'all's attention to shift over, and at the same time, stay locked in with her so that she feels comfortable to say what she's about to say. And it's just, that was a big challenging moment, and it's something that we kept wrestling with in the edit of how do we use this because it's so powerful, but it looks different in the fact that, that she made that turn. I know it sounds simple if you're not a filmmaker, but that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And so that was really challenging. There's just so much. I mean, there was also the longest conversation that we filmed by a long shot. It was a 3-hour conversation almost.
Yeah.
And we needed to boil that down to 8 or 10 minutes of footage.
In documentary filmmaking, you'd like to think that everything that's shot makes the film because it's a documentary, but that's actually not true. There is a lot of framing that happens from the director's standpoint. A lot of my role and a lot of what I needed your help with was framing it in a light that was more appropriate and more along the lines of what the message we were trying to get across was. Certain images or certain words and sentences can sound and mean totally different things played in different lights.
You're having almost a dialogue with yourself from DP to editor, and that dynamic of okay, man, the wide shot, on the track for this shot just looks amazing, but this is a highly emotional scene where we need to see that emotion more than the beauty of this shot, and so using, that more compressed shot makes more sense in terms of a storytelling perspective, even though this other shot is just beautiful and epic and all that, So that was another part of our dialogue, is because sometimes, you hung on those shots that were just beautiful and I love it, but I'm but we've moved in at this point, now we're in the depth of this story, and that pulling back to that shot takes us out of that moment, and so that's kind of a constant dialogue too. We also had a lot of other friends that helped along the way in the editing process, and that was really cool to be able to show, at different stages of the film, to bring in other people who didn't know Sally's story, to watch it and get detailed notes from them about, does this story make sense to you?
Right.
What flows, what feels like it's missing, or things you didn't understand.
Getting feedback from all of those different sources is crucial because we want to make sure that it's consistent feedback in terms of how they felt and how it made them feel and what they felt the message was getting across.
The goal is that this is the first of a series of films because Sally has an amazing story that's going to connect with a lot of people, but there's also other stories to tell that are going to connect with people in different ways. They're going to start new conversations. They're going to allow people to connect and find safe places of belonging with their churches, with their families. That's going to open up the door for all sorts of conversations that bring healing to people. And so we really want to be able to tell a diversity of stories that connect with people at different levels. And so we have a crowdfunding campaign. As you could hear from the conversation here, this is really time intensive. It's very expensive to make films. Even when you have a small indie crew, it's expensive to do this for a nonprofit, a small nonprofit organization that even operates on such a lean budget with only 2 people on staff. So if you want to see more films made like this, please do contribute. Thanks for watching.